The climate change project was created to be used as an interactive presentation tool. It was never intended to be produced as a video itself. We are currently looking at the beginning of the project in the Camtasia editor. The timeline has been detached at the present time. If I select the timeline, you can see that there are a lot of tracks of information, approximately 25 tracks of content in total. Most of the tracks have only a few image type objects on them, but several, like this time one here, have thousands of callouts on them. This particular track here, called time period, has over 6,000 callouts on it. Also, there's a track here called moving X. If I go to Ctrl+Shift+9 to zoom in, select this, go back to the editor view, I can see that there's motion path been applied to that particular track. If I click the Edit in Motion Path, go back to the timeline display, you can see that there are lots of motion path objects applied to the items on this track. There are more motion path points than I can count. I'm going to redock the timeline, so that's Ctrl+3. And I no longer need to see the motion path on that guy. The climate change project primarily focuses on three aspects of things that affects Earth's climate change. They are temperature, sea level, and carbon dioxide level. The project contains a movable X, currently parked here in the lower left corner. If I navigate forward a little bit, the X will move in time and the callout will indicate the time period that we're looking at, in this case, the period of time 2,000 to 3,000 years in the past. That's because the present is on the left. On the right is back in time. There is a panel that will show changes in position of the continents due to plate tectonics. This is actually an overlay of an MP4 of the animation of that action, and as we go back in time you will see the continents change position. Additionally, there are occasional pop-ups like this blue one here that will indicate significant events. This one indicates that this panel is currently in an ice age, and there's an ice sheet over Antarctica as well as Greenland. The period of time covered by the exposed panel is indicated in the bottom of the chart area here, and the current epoch is designated in the lower right corner. The overall project is laid out in 5 graphical panels. We're currently looking at the first panel, which covers the present, back in time to 20,000 years ago. I'm gonna use Ctrl+Right to navigate to the beginning of the second panel. The second panel covers 980,000 years, from 20,000 years ago on the left, to 1 million years ago on the right. Again we have our 3 graphs, temperature, sea level, and carbon dioxide. I'll use Ctrl+Right to go to the beginning of the third panel in the project. Again, this panel covers 4.5 million years ago, from 1 million years ago on the left, to 5.5 million years ago on the right. Here we have temperature in black, sea level is this one, and carbon dioxide is this one. I'll point out that the scale between this panel and the carbon dioxide curve being displayed is not linear. In this particular case, the period of time from here to here is represented only by the area above this red bar you see here, projected up to the CO2 chart. So this CO2 chart goes back further in time than this particular panel. I'm going to advance to the next panel using Ctrl+Right. This is the beginning of the fourth panel in the project. On the left 5.5 million years ago, on the right, 66 million years ago. Total time span of the panel, 60.5 million years. In this case the time span of the displayed panel is represented on CO2 by the area above this red bar. And I'll use Ctrl+Right to navigate to the beginning of the fifth and final panel. This panel covers from 66 million years ago on the left, to 550 million years ago on the right. We have a different kind of CO2 chart here. CO2 here is actually a number of different squiggly lines, because of the amount of uncertainty as to where CO2 should fall. In this case, this line here is the temperature curve, and this solid red line here is the sea level curve. I'll use Ctrl+Home to send this back to the beginning of the first panel. I had previously mentioned that this project was never intended to be produced as a video, and that's because in order to get everything to fit in the project in a usable fashion, the project actually runs for almost 16 hours in duration, impractical from a production point of view. However, it's a good fit for allowing a person to interact with the project within the Camtasia editor. I previously mentioned that I could advance this little X here along the temperature curve, and I'll do that by making clicks on the progress bar here. And you can see it moving across. I'll also point out you'll see a vertical line on top of the X superimposed on it, and follows it along. The X allows you to go up vertically and see where this point in time, in this case, 10,000 years ago, would intersect both the sea level curve and the CO2 curve. You can also use the Ctrl-Alt-R function to display the tool that allows you to put temporary grid lines on the project, and if I wanted to see where this sea level curve intersected its gauge, and its gauge is here in the first panel, I could follow this across and see that, at this point in time, sea level was approximately 40 meters lower than today's value. Anytime I want to, I can hide those bars with Ctrl-Alt-R again. The X will always carry its vertical line. The other ones are optional. Now the reason this was built to allow a person to interact with it is so that interacting with this display, which is a depiction of Earth's climate change over 550 million years, a person interacting with this could do things with it, and also capture it with Recorder, for purposes of making tutorials for presentation purposes. It could also be used for live presentations, if you were working live in the Camtasia editor. Now I'm going to use the JKL function, in this case L, to advance this forward in time. And you can see the X will keep moving. Go. I'll use the L key more often here to get the fastest possible rate. And we're about max speed there. And you can see that the X has been designed with those animation key points to follow the temperature curve. And this will happen throughout the entire project. Of course, what will happen is when we get to the next two panels, the advancing rate will be really on the slow side, so we'll be forced to probably use manual scrubbing instead of the JKL. Let me stop this. Control right bracket takes us to the beginning. And if I do the L key, and then as fast as I can get it, you can see that the X doesn't move very fast. So I'll stop it. And when it's stopped, I'll scrub manually, and make the X move in a more usable fashion. Let's take a look at the last chart here, Control right bracket. And we'll Control Shift and Control Shift 8. Now if I scrub you can see I can make the X move fast enough to make it practical. By the way, you can see what happened here. At this point in time, we get an indication that there's an ice age going on. And you'll see that happen throughout the project as things change. Also I want to point out that the video showing plate tectonics has changed to a different style, but it's still an MP4, and it's been overlaid. Now I'm gonna use Control Home, take us back to the beginning. And one final point, each one of these lines, graphs for temperature, sea level, carbon dioxide, on each panel, will have its own scale. In this particular case, the temperature line is represented by the scale here, which goes from +25 Fahrenheit to -10. Sea level, that's this black line here, has a scale here. In this panel, the scale goes from 0, which is present sea level, down to -140 meters. Okay. And also, before I forget, the black line you see here is 0 on the temperature scale, which is today's average temperature. And carbon dioxide, its scale is here. And in this case, it goes from 180 to 300 parts per million. And when it jumps up here, this little point here represents 410 parts per million. One thing I'll point out by using this presentation within the Camtasia editor is that it lets you make use of the editor's functionality. Let's Control right bracket and move to, let's say, this particular panel. I can send the X to the beginning of this panel. Then I'll use the J button to start us walking back, and then hit it a few times to make it go backwards quicker. And if you were screencasting this, you could use this in a presentation to show how there were fluctuations in Earth's temperature as time went towards the present, and these are the values, and how we're currently averaging above today's average temperature. But you can see that we'll eventually fall below today's average temperature. And that's another way that this particular project works really good when interacting with it in the Camtasia editor. Now I'm going to use Control Home to send this thing home. Now I'm going to use the B key to bring up the media bin. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of callouts. Not a whole lot of media. These are the only video clips, and they're basically used to display the plate tectonic stuff. There's a lot of images, which are static, so they don't put a big burden on the project itself. But all those callouts that I use can be demanding on how the project displays in a computer. And just so you know, I'm using AI9 laptop, with 128GB of RAM. The project itself doesn't take up a lot of RAM. If I jump over here to Task Manager, I mean we're currently only using just a little under 6GB of active RAM. The project file itself, let's go take a look at that. That should be in here. Project file itself is not very big. It's only 32 megabytes, 31 megabytes. So even though the project is really long duration, in this case, almost 16 hours long, it's not a real big project. It just has a lot of stuff in it. And let me separate the timeline again. Full size it, and as I once mentioned, there's a lot of tracks, 25. Control-Shift-7, put everything in. Zoom in here. You can see that most of the full span objects, and things like callouts. The really demanding stuff are this moving X guy, which has an incredible amount of animation keyframes on it. And this time scale track here, which has all those blue callouts indicating the current time point in the project itself, and, like I said earlier, there's over 6,000 of these guys on the timeline, but I'm gonna say that with my i9 laptop, this is a very well-behaved project in the Camtasia editor. In closing, I've made many screencasts as I interacted with this project. The screencast I've put together are in a collection of climate change videos that I've hosted on YouTube, and other places, and between all those screencasts, the project itself gave me a great opportunity to demonstrate how Earth's climate has changed over the past 550 million years, and how those changes have affected, or been indicated by changes in temperature, sea level, and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. If you would like to view some of those screencasts on YouTube, you can enter youtube.com/ and then enter the @ sign, then enter Kayak Man Videos, one word, no spaces, enter key. And then go to the playlist selection. Locate the playlist for climate change or climate crisis. Click that. I'm gonna stop that. You should watch any of the videos from number 3 on. There's 2 sets here, they're both the same slight upgrade. I'd recommend you go scroll down and find the second 03, play that. The climate project depicts 500 million years, and you'll get a perspective of the project as I screencasted it. I think I added dynamic captions, and I also used talking head avatar that I generated using Audi 8, so you might have some fun looking at these. There's quite a few. But that's how I made use of the climate change project, by interacting with it in the Camtasia editor.